Hello.
Hello. I really chose the worst moment to do that. But
Well, thank you for coming on and agreeing to tell me about the news. The point of this whole show is that since I don't really read the news very much, I can find out what's going on, and other people can as well by asking someone who knows. Yeah. So, could you tell me what happened this week?
yeah. So, I mean, my poise on the news is sort of towards sort of geopolitics. So, what happened this week? Like, I guess some important things. It seems Trump is moving to sort of like 55 or 60% chance of being elected, I'd say, somewhere in that range. And it sort of feels like there's a different tone happening. People are starting to be like, wow, this is a thing that's probably going to happen in a way that they weren't a while ago, even though, in my opinion, things haven't shifted that much. So there's something there. There's been some stuff on Ukraine. So Putin put forward an option that if Ukraine gave him a load more land, then he would have a ceasefire. And I don't think that's a good option, but it's a thing that happened. It feels like pretty notable. There's been, I think, another large loan that's been approved. I think this is on top of the US's already. The US recently signed over a load of sort of military aid, and then there's been another loan that's been approved, I think backed by Russian assets, if I'm correct in that. And so the war is going to kind of rumble on for a bit. It's kind of unclear whether the Western coalition realize how they're going to fix, currently things aren't moving. Currently things are in a very sort of stalematey direction.
Yeah, meaning, go ahead.
You go.
Oh, yeah. So basically, the reason it'll just keep rumbling on is that the West, or at least the US, has already committed to providing a certain amount of support. Like what you were saying, they've just given all this stuff to Ukraine. And so, or do you mean like that the political will is still there to support Ukraine in a major way?
I probably actually mean it's rumbling on just because, to my understanding, for a while at least more, Ukraine and Russia are like relatively evenly matched. Mm-hmm. It seemed at different points like people were going to really outmatch one or the other. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning, everybody thought that Russia was just going to absolutely trounce Ukraine. They were going to send special forces into Kyiv, and then they were going to take it over, and that was basically going to be it. Yeah. This was sort of like most people's opinion. Very few people got it right, both that the invasion would happen, but that Russia wouldn't get it. And then for a while, Russia were pushing, and it was feeling, okay, Russia was still going to take a lot of land. And then Ukraine were pushing back, and they were pushing back quite hard and successfully. And then it was like, oh, okay. And then there was like a long waiting period where Ukraine was building up strength, and they get delivered a load of like vehicles. And it seemed like there was a bit of a chance in that period they were going to break through. Maybe they were going to take Crimea, which is the sort of like big chunk of land, like sort of beneath Ukraine. And it's a valuable piece of land. It has lots of industry.
Yeah,
that's probably my understanding. But then they didn't, and then we've been stuck for a while in this stalemate where just both sides are just kind of like throwing men into this meat grinder.
Right.
And if US and sort of European support stopped, then probably I think Russia would eventually like push through and take more of Ukraine. And depending on how that went, yeah, I think that's what happened. But with support at current levels, it just feels like currently there's going to be a stalemate. Russia's never had air superiority for reasons I don't really understand. So, like, you just have this like kind of like big sort of like defensive, like structures, people pushing backwards and forwards over them. So yeah, things that could change if Trump gets in and then stops Ukraine aid, which some of the Republicans seem to want to do. Then maybe Ukraine is unable to support, and so then Russia eventually pushes over, and then it probably takes quite a lot of land, and then it maybe keeps trying to slice, who knows, like take sort of more slices of land. And if there is a significant increase in the amount, or if there is, internal problems in either country, again, could just shift the balance, right? There's, if China helps Russia a lot, if there's an increase in the amount of Ukraine, I mean, my understanding at the moment, from chatting to some people, is that Ukraine really lost the best of its fighters in the sort of failed push last year. And so it really is. But I think there's also some question about drone technology. The side that sort of manages, I don't know if you've seen these videos of these drone operators sort of like hooked up with like VR and they're flying drones. That's quite intensive at the moment. You've got to have like one person per drone. If it changes such that you could have like one person for every 10 or 100 drones, perhaps because they, send them, like because you only need a person for some specific aspect for the specific attack or something, then I think, that could throw everything up in the air again.
Yeah, and with Putin's offer, are there people like who are supporting Ukraine right now who are pressuring them to take it? For example, like the Republicans who want to reduce aid to Ukraine. Has there been any sense of like, Ukraine needs to take this deal, or is kind of nobody saying that like this is an unreasonable?
It would surprise me if the sort of Democrats and Western coalitions said that, but it wouldn't surprise me if behind closed doors they were pushing for some kind of ceasefire.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It wouldn't surprise me if Republicans have said that. I guess my focus on the news is generally to try and give my best guess of what's going on. So I think people shouldn't trust that I know exactly what's going on, but I think aiming to have a sort of rough guess of what's going on is sort of better than knowing some facts and then only saying the facts. So yeah, I mean, it would be my guess that, as you say, like Republicans might sort of push for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, then there's there's a number more. There's like a number more sort of things. There's, I guess, to rattle through them, then we can cover back things. There's this H5N1, this like this recent bird flu outbreak in the US amongst sort of cows, which the US, but it's probably not going to be a problem, but the US isn't taking it seriously enough.
You said it's probably going to be a problem, and the US is not taking it seriously enough.
It's probably not going to be a problem.
Okay, yeah.
But the US is not. The US is just not taking it seriously enough. The kinds of errors we saw in the early COVID pandemic, we are seeing again. Just like if you want to think about how you put your flow of like resource / attention, I think if the virus is kind of like this, then people sort of think they should just like kind of match it. Whereas my opinion is, right, like when you have some sense the virus could go like this, you then skyrocket your attention focus. And as soon as you realize it's not one of those, then it should sort of plow back down. So you should aim to have like a sort of short bump. But if it like keeps going up, then you do like a, then you keep climbing. Like you want to climb ahead of it, and then once it starts to fall, then you could just like plunge back down your attention. And so I don't think they're doing nearly enough testing of cows. I don't, they could be really sort of starting to ramp up focus and say this is a big issue. And I understand it's an election campaign, and you don't want to sort of panic people, but I just think it's the wrong call. And there is some small chance, I don't know, 1 to 5% or something, that this ends really badly. And I still think that how loose we are on pandemics is just unbelievable. I think given that we had one in the last 5 years, just the fact that we could have another and many of the same mistakes would happen, I just think is, I think it's frustrating.
The main thing you want to be different is you want there to be a ton of resources dedicated to figuring out what's going on and how risky it is. And so, and
what's not even a ton, right? Like, so just a ramping up of testing. I don't know if, and I think the main resource is like is like focus, right? So the administration needs to be like, like this is one of the things that we should focus on for the next couple of weeks. Like
Right.
we need to be just like to be monitoring this, to be understanding, be sure that we know what's going on, sure we know where it's going, and then at some point you can just ramp that back down again.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And can you give like the 10-second summary of what's actually gone on so far with the virus? So you said it's a bird flu, and it's affecting cows right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, so I don't want to say that I'm like super hot on this. People can look more, but my rough understanding is bird flu occasionally will spread to other animals and sometimes to humans. And I mean, if people don't know, sort of my understanding of like disease 101 is that most really bad diseases are diseases don't optimize to kill their hosts. Like ideally, if you're going to make a disease, if you're a disease, the disease that would most common would be the one which people could get many, many times, and would give you like a cold for sort of like 100 weeks, and you'd be sneezing it around, and that would be the disease that you would most likely to expect to see in some population, right? Because evolutionarily speaking, like things aren't evolved to do anything. It's just that the thing that turns up is the thing that's best at spreading itself in the next generation. And so like it's quite surprising that you have diseases that kill humans. And that is because many of those diseases are diseases that give like cows the sniffles, whatever. Right? They're diseases that make an animal not very sick at all. So, bird flu, I don't know if it kills chickens or whatever. I'm just saying like it's a disease that's in chickens for some reason, and now it's spreading to cows. And if it spreads to humans, sometimes those diseases can be very, very dangerous and very, very spreading fast. And so it's you'll hear relatively every 3 or 4 years you'll hear something about bird flu. I think it's something about 2010. And so the fact that lots of cows are getting it, humans are around cows. We don't know how many cows. We're not really tracking that. Those are the sort of like concerning aspects of this.
And have the cows been very sick, or just kind of noticeably having a flu or whatever?
I think I both don't know, which is I'm going to look at some forecasts just so I can actually give you some more. So I both don't know, but I also don't think it's super important.
Okay.
Because it just can respond very differently to humans than to cows. But yeah, so if you look at Metaculus, which is a forecasting site, they're currently giving a 13% chance. These are like good forecasters. There's been probably quite a lot of forecasts on this. Let me see if in a second I'll be able to figure out how many forecasts there are. 187 predictions on this, and they give it a 13% chance that there'll be human-to-human transmission before 2025.
All right.
And like again, it's probably going to be fine, but that's just like way too high for like
being blasé about it.
Yeah, and I just don't think the government is taking it seriously. The US government is taking it nearly seriously enough.
Right. So the concern is just that it will jump to humans. It's not that like we're having a problem for the cows right now. Yes.
Yes, I think that is the case. Yeah. And like, you only need a disease which like has this, if you remember from COVID, this like R value. You only need a disease that like has some high value to transfer to like 3 humans.
Yeah.
Because then it transfers to 9, it transfers to, and then it's just like, then it's the nightmare scenario. And it's just really much cheaper to like figure out exactly what's going on to, if you've got to cull populations of cows, and again, this is tragic, cows have consciousness, they don't want to die. But, like if you've got to do that, you've got to do that rather than have this disease spreading across the world. Again, it probably won't. It's like, it's unlikely. But I'm just like, this is, this is probably like 10 millions in resources to avoid a sort of 1 to 5% chance of like $1 trillion damage. So it's like, it's very cheap to fix at this point, and I would recommend that people do.
Great. So we got Ukraine, we got this bird flu. Anything else?
Yeah. What else? Well, I think there was some stuff. I feel like most other things I'm just like not going to think are as important as the things I've just said. Like, I guess you've got other elections. So you've got the US election. We could talk about that in more detail. I don't necessarily send you do deeply. I don't think there's lots to say about the US election, except that, yeah, like at this point, the sort of like, what is it? 538 has got it as like a 55% chance Biden wins, but they're using a different model than before because Nate Silver left. But most other things have, The Economist, Polymarket, which is a big prediction market, Metaculus, another forecasting site. Most of these other sites have it sort of like 55 to 65% of Trump winning. Mm-hmm. And I think people should update to that, right? Like they should just be like, on balance, maybe to probably Trump is going to be the next president. And if they don't want that, then they should,
react accordingly.
Donate money or talk to their friends or, or talk to people who, try and convince people they should do things, they should agitate, whatever. But they should also, do some emotional work to be like, okay, like what's the world going to be like? Do I want to be in, like, how do I want to interact with that? Do I need to save some money? Do I blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's like, I just think, there's a lot that could change, but that's why it's like not at 80 or 90%, but just Biden is not very popular, and he comes across as quite, and like maybe the stuff around abortion and the stuff around Trump being convicted, which happened quite recently, is gonna tip it. Maybe people will be like, "Wow, I don't want to elect a felon," but they might. If they see it as a politically motivated crime, if independents think, things weren't that bad. I talked to quite a lot of sort of like centrist to rightish wing Republicans at a conference I went to, and a lot of them really were just like, yeah, the economy was so much better in 2019. Things were so much better. Before COVID, that's not Trump's fault. And I mean, I disagree with that. Like, I think Trump handled COVID badly, and I think Biden has actually managed to avoid a recession pretty well. But those are the actual views of people, and if those views are broadly representative, which that seems probable to me, then then Trump wins.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What else? You've got elections in the UK and in France. The UK election is very boring. Labour are going to win. Sort of at the moment, the question is whether they're going to win by like quite a lot or a stupid, ridiculous, record-breaking amount. Okay. Like, people do not like the Tories. They have, they're sort of being flanked on their right by a sort of populist party, and Labour have sort of shifted into the centre a bit. So they hold most of the left. They hold a chunk of the centre. Like, that's how you win elections in Britain. And when the party you're up against is just like deeply, deeply unpopular, like, yeah, this is just like very hard, I think, for Starmer. Like, yeah, this is just like very hard for Starmer to lose at this point, I think, particularly as well. I don't know what percentage of UK votes are postal votes, but I'm not going to say that, but yeah, I think the French elections are pretty notable, right? The French have called elections. So yeah, I mean, Americans may not know this, but in many countries, elections happen whenever someone calls them. In the UK, in France, they're not like settled. They're not set date. They're just like whenever people call the elections. And after a bad time in the local elections against the sort of most right-wing party, Macron, I think, as I understand it, decided, well, if I force the question now, then people will have to choose between me and like a very bad sort of like very right-wing, some people say fascist kind of option. Yeah. And so he thinks he's going to win that trade-off. So that's like why he's doing it. But I think a lot of people were surprised because he's sort of at the worst point that he's been in. But then
Surprised
the
that
right wing
surprised that he called the election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's been like a load of infighting on the right, and the left have kind of like
Consolidated
together.
Yeah.
And so there's like now, so the France have a 2-round system where you have like a set of elections and the top 2 parties go against each other.
Yeah.
And so really, like, I think it's pretty clear that some kind of like the like big right-wing party will go through. Though I think it'd be really interesting if they didn't. But it seems like most people seem to be assuming that.
So it'll probably be a very right-wing party running against him.
Against either Macron or the left. I guess it's going to be Macron.
Okay.
And then I guess Macron will win. But, you know, that I haven't. Let's read some. Let's find ourselves some betting markets. Who will be elected president of France in 2027? I don't. Is that in the next legislative election? Yes. Okay. So it's going to take me a moment to figure out. Also, I have to remember what all the parties are called, because that is. Also, the presidential election isn't quite based on seats, is it? Gee, this is. Will markets have this? Yeah, I mean, I think my news is like a lot about trying to follow geopolitics, because I think that's often much more important than local news, and then also trying to add sort of betting markets and forecasting into this, such that you get the sense of more people.
Yeah. And so what are the stakes like in the French election? Like if the right wing party to win, what does that mean? And like how right is the right wing party? I don't know how closely you follow that.
My sense is the right wing party are like pretty right wing. Yeah. I mean, I imagine they are not as right wing as people who dislike them say they are. Like, I imagine that I could believe they're like not openly fascist or whatever. I think that wouldn't surprise me. But I also imagine they probably are talking about, you know, strong immigration restrictions, conceivably about deporting people, about maybe cutting off benefits to people, maybe some language around groups which are quite sort of clearly like mapped onto like racial groups. Again, to an American audience, like I think many people don't have like a sense of how racist mainland Europe is compared to Britain and America and Canada. Like for all that the US like kind of tears its own back about like racial issues, like mainland Europe is just like much more racist, and like, you know, people.
What's like the form that the racism takes? Like,
I think it's stuff.
People, or the sense that certain people shouldn't be there, or.
Yeah, so like I think like probably like racial slurs are more common. Like I think when you interview people saying like, you know, would you want your daughter to marry a person of X race? Would you want to live next door to somebody of X race? Like all of those like numbers where people are like no are just like much higher. You sort of got, you know, when you actually interview Trump supporters, like even most of those people are like no, like of course, like I get, you know, I think they did like a recent piece of polling, and it even like the number in my head is that like there was some sort of really quite excessive view, and it was like only a quarter of like hardcore Trump supporters when liberals thought it was a much higher number.
Right.
And, you know, in terms of what percentage of the American population thinks that it's unacceptable to marry, to say you shouldn't marry someone of a different race, I mean, I guess like that's, I don't know, I guess that's between like 5 and 10% or something. And it wouldn't surprise me if in Europe it's like 15% or something. I could be wrong, but this would be my, like my guess. And so yeah, like was there one in Italy? I feel like it's kind of hard to tell what will really happen within some of these countries if like a genuinely more far right party gets it. Like I think there's like fewer checks and balances often in European nations. I think like European nations are like less. They don't have like the US has a big C around it, which means that like basically all immigration really is about, as I understand, about immigration from Mexico. That's like the whole discussion of immigration, and there's kind of like a complicated thing there because like Mexicans come in and do loads of jobs that people in the US want them to do. So there is like a kind of complex, but it's like that. Whereas like within Europe, there's people arriving from Africa, sometimes refugees traveling sort of across Europe, and like there's sort of like a broader. You've got refugees coming in from. I mean, sometimes you've got them coming from like Western Europe as well, and I think, yeah, I just, and Europe's sort of like less prosperous and kind of has a history. Like in America, it kind of fights against the concept of like, we're like an immigrant nation, and you've got like, we don't want these people coming here. Whereas like in Europe, like the countries just don't have that notion. Like there's no notion that like if you like move to Germany, you're a German.
Yeah.
Like if you move, and there's sort of like semi that notion in the UK, but even then, there's not really. Like people could say, like, are you really British? And like nobody sort of thinks, like if you were born in Britain, people think you're British. But people, sadly, I think like a good chunk of people will be like, oh, you've moved here, you're like not really British. In a way that I think actually when people move and become an American, they get citizenship, Americans are like, you're an American now. And like even less in Europe, where they're just like, well, like obviously you're not German, obviously you're not French, obviously you're not Italian. And like, I think that allows for when policy swings, it might really swing quite a lot further than it could in the US or something like that.
Okay, interesting.
So okay. So here's a thing on. So I mean the prediction markets really don't think that Macron is going to lose. They think there's like a 6% chance he loses, which is very low to me. But I'm going to take when the forecasters say it, I'm going to believe them. So yeah, I mean it seems like maybe this story will be like less of a story than I thought it was.
Okay, interesting. Is there anything going on in Israel and Palestine this week that I should know about?
To my knowledge, no. Like, I don't think there's like loads. I mean, I think is Netanyahu speaking in the US? So maybe. But I can't remember if Netanyahu is visiting the US or not. But I mean, my general sense on Israel Palestine is like it's a tragedy, and it's like it's awful, but it's just quite hard to think about well. And probably like rather than following the news closely, it's better to think about like what actually might help the situation. Like, I guess we're seeing the US start to be more robust. I think there was a Security Council thing that passed in the UN Security Council, like calling for a ceasefire. That's quite a big deal. The US generally blocks those, and it didn't, I think.
Did it participate in it? Like, did it also call for the ceasefire, or did it just allow the council to call for it?
Yeah, this was last week. So this was called for Hamas to accept a ceasefire proposal, which I guess it's like a framing who's being asked to accept, but I guess it's still some sort of push for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So I guess it was an American-led effort. So everybody, Russia abstained of the 5 permanent Security Council members.
But the
Were
others,
the only ones with vetoes. Am I right in saying that? I think. So yeah, but I think it was a pretty big deal even for the US to push it, because yeah, and the US has been sort of saying they may not give military aid to Israel if they carry on. So there, you are seeing a sort of toughening up of the stance from Israel, from the US towards Israel, which.
and is there something that's changed that, or has it been just the passage of time?
I don't know. If I were to guess, I would say it is just a mix of like the horror coming out. Like there is some notion that that Israel gets to defend itself, but that currency won't buy movement forever. People will just start to be like, these people, like a small kid has gone and like punched a big kid in the nuts, and the big kid has smacked the small kid a lot. And at this point, really, like the question is like, sure, like the small kid like deserved it, but like how much is acceptable? We've just been seeing this a big kid just wail. There was never a question that Israel wasn't going to be able to win this fight. And I think in America there wasn't really a question that Israel had some right to self-defense, but I think there is a question of how long that lasts for and how wide that can be, and like, yeah, I think the fact that like the last place that it seemed like like refugees could sort of be like refugees are sort of like penned in Gaza, right? Like it's not easy for them to leave to Egypt, and there's like a reasonable amount of blame that goes to other nations in the Middle East, right? Who won't accept Gaza refugees, and so they're just they're penned there, and then the area is just being obliterated. And one thing that can happen is that Israel can just absolutely try and destroy Gaza, like just try and like level it, take it over, push the people out. There can be some kind of ceasefire. Like it's not clear to me how that moves towards Gaza being a functional state, I guess. Like it's not clear what happens differently than what happened before. Like my understanding is that Gazans have quite high support for Hamas. And like, so, but I just don't think this level of like just killing a civilian population can last. And like it seems like the US resolve, and I think European resolve is like weaker than US resolve here. So it's kind of like,
meaning you've perceived a shift on the part of
I think a slow
that there are people who like at the beginning were like, oh yeah, these attacks were horrific, it's appropriate to respond in some way, and then some of those people are now saying, all right, we've gone, like you've done what you can do, or something like that.
I think the fact that the US is starting to sort of say, we're not going to give you more munitions if you do this, or like, I mean, the Israel doesn't really need US munitions, and personally, I'm not super sure they're providing Israel with munitions. Like, I don't know, I'd have to hear the geopolitical case for it. But Israel, when it was first Israel, like 15, 60 years ago, like really needed US support to be able to survive, but that isn't the case anymore. So, but yeah, the fact that this is being used as a bargaining chip suggests the US opinion, and wasn't before, is the kind of is the shift.
And like, to what extent is the hostage situation affecting people's perception of this? Because I know, hostages were taken, some of them died, some of them were still alive. I know some of them have been taken back and others have died. Presumably there are some, I don't know how many are currently there, but has
Yeah, I don't know.
or have other people said things like, no, we're not going to stop until we get the last hostage back, or what's the?
Yeah, I think the hostages are very important within, as I understand it, within the Israeli
That would make
like
sense.
sort of mental conception. I think they're less important within sort of like the Western coalition, I think, in terms of discussions.
Right.
Like, I probably don't know well enough. I mean, my guess would be, Israel, so my guess normally would be that they're not that important, right? Like, after you've had a war with, I guess in my head it's like like 30 to 500,000 casualties, right? Like, I don't quite know. My head probably, like, my median would be there's been like tens of thousands of casualties, high tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Like, once you've had that many people die over hundreds of hostages, then to me, I would be like, a blood price has been paid. But Israel has in the past spent huge amounts of resources to get back sort of even one Israeli hostage. So
yeah, and they got back a
notion,
correct?
right? Yeah, but my understanding is that all of the male hostages they still haven't got back, or there's like a chunk of male hostages. I could be wrong on that. That's like a rough guess. But yeah, my understanding is, yeah, I wouldn't want to speak on this. Like,
yeah, okay. That makes sense. Good. Well, anything else I should know about? Is that it for the news this week?
I mean, I guess there's like some stuff on like AI, like OpenAI adding like a national security guy to their board, and
so you said a national security person on the board?
Yeah, so like, and a researcher called Leopold Aschenbrenner wrote this report talking about like risks to U.S. national security from AI, and Sam Altman has been talking about OpenAI, which is a non-profit being turned into a for-profit. These things are all, yeah, like, these things are pushing an increased seriousness of AI discourse, moving, AI discourse starting to move into national security channels. Some discussions of like great power conflict. Yeah, I think AI is very important. I think a thing like a sort of a top sort of 5 priority most of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's like much to report this week, but yeah, I mean, I think my main stance on the news is like focus on it less, focus on it to the extent you're interested in it, try and understand the mechanisms that are involved, and listen to more experts where you can, listen to like large groups, listen to votes rather than just individuals, and note the big shifts or consider what could cause big shifts, those kinds of things. So things to watch out for in these weeks are some big new AI model that is way better than anything we've seen before, or some like major shift, XAI, Elon Musk's company, releasing something that's really competitive with Anthropic and OpenAI and Google DeepMind, or some sort of other big shock or crisis. On H5N1, it's just like the odds of things being really bad increase, hearing some human-to-human transmissions. I think those would be like big updates. On Russia, I think shifts in the US presidency are big shifts there. And if there's any word of actual ceasefire or really significant internal tensions within either Russia or Ukraine, those are things to watch out for. Within Gaza, like discussion of an actual ceasefire, International Criminal Court convictions, America withholding military aid. These are things to watch out for. And, then sort of, general upsets. If US election isn't won by the Labour, if Macron gets thrown out, seemingly that will be a huge upset. If there's like another coup in the sort of Sahel belt, if there's like a big increase in action around Taiwan, these things would all be things that that I would, like there's, Mexico becoming much more unstable. I think it's like there's like some rumblings of like things, I don't think it's like notable, but like those are, and and the US election, if Biden does really well in these debates, then that will be a big shift. If he starts becoming more popular, if people start seeing the economy as being better, if it seems like Trump's popularity really takes a nosedive because of the felon thing, if there is like some sort of structural shift as people become more engaged, these things are all
things to watch.
Like things to watch for. But in general, like, I sense, this is enough news for most people.
Good. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thanks
right.
for chatting.
Yes. Thank you.